It was supposed to be a simple job. I'm a security guard, nothing special. Just a guy keeping watch over the night shift, alone in an old cemetery on the outskirts of New Orleans. The place was eerie, sure, but I'd worked there for almost a year without anything too unusual happening. The people who worked the day shift often joked about the spooky vibes, but I didn't buy into it. Ghosts? Superstition. That's all it was. But then that night happened. The wind was howling, pushing the shadows deeper into the graves, making the whole place feel alive in a way it shouldn't. It was around 11 p.m. when I noticed a strange figure standing in front of one of the mausoleums, just beyond the security fence. I assumed it was someone who had snuck in, maybe a trespasser looking for some thrill. I grabbed my flashlight and walked toward the gate. That's when I heard the footsteps. Not my own, someone else's. Slow, deliberate, like they were waiting for me to approach. I froze. I wasn't scared at first, just confused. I turned the corner to check, but when I reached the spot where the figure had been, nothing, no one, just empty graves, shadows, and the oppressive silence that had settled over the cemetery. I stood there for a while, scanning the area, telling myself it was just my mind playing tricks on me. But then, as I turned to head back to the guard station, I heard it again. Footsteps, only closer this time. And that's when I felt it. A cold, crawling sensation on the back of my neck, like someone was watching me. I spun around, heart racing. No one was there. My flashlight shook as I scanned the area, my breath coming out in quick, shallow gasps. The footsteps had stopped, but something else was in the air now. A faint, almost imperceptible whispering, like voices from deep beneath the ground. "Hello?" I called out, my voice shaky but trying to sound confident. Nothing. The cemetery seemed as dead as always, with only the wind and my own heartbeat echoing through the night. I decided to check the area more thoroughly, figuring maybe it was just an animal, something that could explain the sound. But as I walked past the old tombstones, I couldn't help but notice how everything felt off. The air was heavier, thicker. Every rustling leaf felt like it was hiding something. And that whispering, it was growing louder. I stopped in front of a weathered tombstone, barely legible in the dim light. It was one of the oldest in the cemetery. Its edges worn, its inscription nearly erased by time. I was drawn to it for some reason, like it was calling me. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up as I stepped closer, my flashlight now pointing directly at the stone. That's when I noticed something odd. The ground around the tombstone was disturbed, as if someone or something had recently dug up the earth. But there were no footprints, no signs of anyone being here. Just the fresh, disturbed soil and the faintest hint of something moving beneath the surface. I knelt down, my hands trembling, unsure of why I felt compelled to touch it. I brushed away some of the dirt and immediately recoiled. A hand, a cold, pale hand, reaching up from the earth like it was trying to pull itself out of its grave. I stumbled backward, my pulse pounding in my ears. I turned and ran, but the ground seemed to shift under my feet. The footsteps, they weren't just behind me now. They were all around me. They were coming from the graves. Couldn't breathe. I had to get out of there. I didn't even stop to think. I sprinted back toward the guard station, heart hammering in my chest. The whispers seemed to follow me, growing louder with every step, until it felt like they were in my ears, pressing against my skull. I finally burst through the door of the guard station, slamming it shut behind me. The silence inside was deafening. I leaned against the door, trying to catch my breath, but the air felt suffocating. I grabbed my radio, my hands shaking too violently to get a proper grip. I needed to call someone. I needed to get out, but the words wouldn't come. That's when I noticed something. The room, it was colder, so much colder than it should have been. I glanced around. The temperature wasn't just dropping. It was like something was absorbing the warmth from the air itself. The windows rattled in their frames, even though there was no wind outside. The whispers had stopped, but now there was a deep, guttural sound, a scraping like fingernails against stone. It was coming from outside, from the direction of that old tombstone. I couldn't just stay there. I had to go back. I had to see what was going on. Against my better judgment, I grabbed the keys, shoved them into my pocket, and stepped back outside. The cold bit at my skin like 1,000 needles, but I couldn't turn back. I crept toward the mausoleum, my flashlight flickering with every step. The whispers were back, louder than ever, swirling around me like a storm. I stopped in front of the disturbed grave again. This time, the hand wasn't the only thing sticking out of the earth. The rest of the body was emerging, slow and deliberate, like it had all the time in the world. It was a man. His face, pale and bloated with decay, stared up at me with empty eyes. But that wasn't the worst part. No, his mouth was moving. It was whispering something to me. I could barely make it out at first, the words coming in fragments. "Don't leave, you're next." The ground around him shifted again, and I stumbled back in horror as more hands began to claw their way up from the earth. I turned to run, but something grabbed my ankle, pulling me toward the grave. I kicked and screamed, my flashlight spinning wildly in my hand, casting eerie shadows across the cemetery. I felt my chest tighten as I was dragged toward the open grave, the hands grasping at me, cold and relentless. My pulse was deafening in my ears, and my legs were shaking uncontrollably. I fought back with everything I had, kicking, clawing at the earth, but it was like the ground itself had come alive, pulling me in deeper, suffocating me with the weight of the darkness. And then, just as I thought I couldn't fight it anymore, something shifted. The grip loosened. I yanked my leg free with all the strength I could muster, falling backward onto the cold, hard ground. My flashlight fell from my hand, flickering out as it tumbled away into the darkness. I lay there, gasping for breath, unsure of how much time had passed. Everything around me was eerily quiet again, the night air heavy and thick with dread. I forced myself to stand, my body aching from the struggle. I couldn't stay here. I couldn't let whatever that thing was drag me into the earth with it. But as I turned to run, I heard it again, the sound of footsteps. Soft, deliberate, and unmistakably close. My blood ran cold. I was no longer alone in the cemetery. I whipped around, desperate to see what was following me, but the shadows were thick, impenetrable. I could feel it, though. I could feel its eyes on me, boring into the back of my skull. Then a voice, low and gravelly, broke the silence. "Running won't help you." I froze. The voice wasn't human, not anymore. It was something twisted, something ancient, something that had been buried long ago. I didn't need to see it to know what it was. It was the man from the grave. His decaying body, his empty eyes, all of it was still out there, watching me. Without a second thought, I turned and ran again, faster than before, my legs burning with the effort. I had no plan, no direction, just a desperate need to escape. I didn't care if I ran into the forest, into the highway, or into the unknown. I just needed to get away. Somehow I made it to the front gate. I yanked it open with all the strength I could muster and didn't stop until I was outside, in the safety of the streetlights. I didn't look back. I don't know how long I stood there, breathing heavily, shaking, but eventually, I mustered the courage to look over my shoulder. The cemetery loomed in the distance, silent once again, as if nothing had happened. But I knew better. I knew something had woken up in that place, something that wasn't meant to be disturbed. I called my supervisor the next morning to report what happened, but of course he didn't believe me. Who would? A night guard, alone in a cemetery, with no proof of anything other than his word? I'm sure he chalked it up to stress or my imagination running wild. But I know what I saw, what I felt, and every time I close my eyes, I can hear that voice, whispering in the back of my mind. "You're next." The worst part? I never told anyone this. Not until now. Because even now I can feel it. Something is waiting for me, deep beneath the ground. And one day, I'll be back in that cemetery, whether I like it or not. I didn't want to return to that cemetery. Hell, I swore to myself I would never go near it again. But life doesn't always work out the way you plan. It's been months since that night, and I've been trying to put it all behind me. Bury it like I was supposed to bury those damn thoughts in the ground. But no matter how far I try to run, it always finds me. That feeling, that presence. It's like it's lurking just beyond my sight, waiting for me to slip, waiting for me to forget. And it's getting harder to ignore. A few weeks ago, I started having dreams. Dreams of the cemetery, of that grave. The hand reaching out from the dirt. The whispering. It was so vivid that I couldn't tell if I was awake or asleep. I saw myself standing there again, at that same spot, unable to move, unable to escape. The voice was louder now, more insistent. I thought it was just my mind playing tricks on me. But then I received the letter. It was a thick envelope, weathered, like it had been sitting around for ages. When I opened it, I found a single sheet of paper. Nothing on it but one sentence: "You never left." I couldn't understand. I thought I was free. I thought I had outrun whatever was waiting in that cemetery. But the truth is I never truly escaped. The dreams haven't stopped. I see the cemetery in my sleep every night, and I can hear the scraping of nails against stone again, as if something is still clawing its way up from the grave. Something wants to pull me back. I know I have to go back. I know I have no choice. I'm heading there tonight. They say you can never escape what's buried. But they never tell you what happens when you're the one who's buried, waiting for the ground to open up and swallow you whole. I drove to the cemetery under the cover of night, the headlights of my car slicing through the thick darkness like a knife. I didn't want to go. My body was shaking with fear, my mind screaming at me to turn around, but I knew I had no choice. I had to finish this. I had to face whatever had been haunting me, because if I didn't, it would follow me for the rest of my life. There would be no escape. When I arrived, the cemetery looked exactly the same as it had that first night. Dark, silent, dead. I parked by the gate and sat there for a moment, trying to steady my breath. The weight of the place pressed down on me, like the air itself was thick with something wrong. The whispers were already there. I could hear them, distant but growing louder the longer I stayed. I stepped out of the car, my legs unsteady, my heart pounding in my chest. My flashlight flickered as I turned it on, but the beam cut through the darkness just enough for me to see. The ground felt different. It wasn't just the chill in the air. It was like the earth itself was alive, pulsing beneath my feet. The further I walked, the heavier the atmosphere became, until I found myself standing in front of the same tombstone I had seen months ago. The one with the hand reaching out from the grave. The one that had been calling me. I couldn't see the body this time, but I knew it was there. I could feel it. That thing buried beneath the earth. It was waiting for me. I fell to my knees, my mind unraveling with every passing second. I couldn't run this time. I couldn't escape. The ground trembled beneath me, and the whispers were no longer whispers. They were voices, rising from the depths. They were all around me now, voices that spoke of death, of something older than time itself. "You're home," the voice from the grave whispered, that same gravelly tone I'd heard before. "Come closer." I tried to stand, but something held me down. Cold hands, invisible, wrapped around my legs, pulling me toward the grave. The earth shifted again, and I felt it, the ground giving way beneath me. And then I saw it, the figure, the decayed corpse of the man. His eyes, wide and empty, staring at me like a predator. His mouth moved again, speaking those same words. "You never left. You were always meant to return." And that's when I understood. This place, this cemetery, it wasn't just haunted by spirits. It was a trap. A place where those who dared to disturb it would be bound to it forever. And I had unknowingly become a part of it. The whispers, the dreams, the pull to return. I couldn't escape anymore. There was no way out. The last thing I remember is the coldness of the earth closing around me, the hands of the dead dragging me into the grave. My screams were lost in the silence, swallowed by the very ground that had been waiting for me all along.